She didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm out. She simply slid a single folder across the glass table, and for the first time, the CEO stopped laughing. The room reeked of cedarwood and self-importance. Every Tuesday morning, the executive floor held its ritual of coffee-stained confidence and poorly concealed egos, dressed in tailored suits and empty promises. Elena slipped through the glass doors of the boardroom like a whisper, unnoticed, uninvited, but impeccably prepared. Her role wasn't flashy. She wasn't a VP, not even a director, just senior analyst, strategic holdings, which on paper meant little, until you realized she was the one who read the contracts before the lawyers did. She had a quiet reputation, never late, never loud, never wrong. And that made her dangerous in a building where everyone lied for a living. 3 seats down, Brandon, the CEO's golden boy, was smirking like he knew a secret. His cufflinks caught the light as he leaned back, casually tossing out buzzwords like liquidity event and exit velocity. His audience, mostly yes men and one exhausted CFO, nodded on autopilot. Elena scribbled something in her pad. The smirk didn't fade. "Any comments on the merger pathway?" Brandon asked the room, eyes already dismissing hers. She waited, just long enough to make it uncomfortable. "Yes," she said, flipping to a page in her file. "We may have an issue with Section 6.3. Subclause B restricts share dilution without unanimous Class A approval. That includes non-voting shareholders if the merger affects asset control." The room froze for a second, then chuckles. Brandon laughed, sharp and condescending. "Good luck with those shares," he said, shaking his head. 2 microseconds passed. She didn't blink. "I'm not asking for luck," Elena replied. "I'm stating there's a merger blocker written into the holding structure. You can't consolidate without my consent." The CFO looked up so fast his pen fell. Brandon's laugh cracked, then faded. The others glanced around, the silence sticky. She continued, voice calm. "As per the 2021 restructure, I own 1.7% of protected voting rights through Employee Class E. And yes, legal hold was triggered yesterday when I saw the term sheets cross without audit. So congratulations, you just walked into a contract freeze." A beat. Then the CFO slowly leaned toward Brandon, voice low, tight with dread. "Please tell me you didn't fire her." Brandon's jaw twitched, because he had. 2 weeks ago. Quietly. Without cause. Just enough to strip her access. Not enough to remove her voting power. That would take a legal process he never initiated, because he thought she'd just walk away. But Elena had been waiting, and her folder wasn't empty. You think that's all she had? You're going to regret not reading the next chapter. The glass folder she slid across the table looked harmless. No label, no warning, just thin sheets of paper, crisply arranged with a single post-it on top. Effective upon notice. Brandon didn't touch it at first. No one did, like it might explode. Elena stood there, not defiant, not smug, just still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask for power because it already owns it. Then the CFO, Patrick, reached forward and opened it. 3 pages in, he stopped breathing through his nose. "Elena," he said slowly, scanning the document with increasing panic. "This is a legal hold memo with voting suspension warnings." "I filed it 2 days ago," she said, brushing an invisible crease from her sleeve. "Attached is a time-stamped archive of the platform access logs, every instance where merger data was altered without board notification." Patrick turned the page, face paler with every word. "And you sent this to compliance already?" "Elena," Brandon interrupted sharply, "you're not even with the company anymore. Your rights ended with your contract. But she was ready. My employment status doesn't affect my shareholder rights, she said. Section 9.4 of the governance doc. Voting power persists post-termination until holdings are liquidated, which they weren't because you never filed the transfer, did you? Silence again. Heavy. Sour. Patrick glanced at Brandon like a man realizing he's on a plane with no pilot. Elena, he said again, softer this time. This could block the entire transaction. She nodded. That's the point. Outside, the city moved like it didn't care. Taxis honked, coffee cups steamed, and inside this room, one silent woman had just collapsed a tower of arrogance with a single document and a patient smirk. Also, she added, turning to leave, I've submitted a claim for breach of internal fiduciary protocols. Should you attempt to push the vote through without settlement, you'll face a formal injunction by Friday. She didn't slam the door. She didn't need to. Behind her, Brandon finally picked up the folder. His hands were shaking because somewhere between his ego and her silence, he'd missed the only clause that mattered. And in the next chapter, you'll find out what he should have seen coming all along. If you've ever been underestimated in a room full of suits, hit subscribe. Elena's just getting started. The next morning, Brandon arrived early. Too early for a man who usually sauntered in after his second latte and a round of self-congratulations. His assistant noted the change with a raised eyebrow, but said nothing. He was pale, tight-jawed, not from guilt. Brandon didn't have the wiring for that, but from fear. Real, creeping fear. He shut his office door and began digging. First into Slack logs, then email backups, then access logs from the week Elena had filed her legal hold. But the more he looked, the more it dawned on him. She'd covered everything. She knew this system better than he did. She knew his system better than he ever bothered to learn. Downstairs, the legal team was whispering. By 10:17 a.m., word had spread that a voting power discrepancy had frozen the merger. Not delayed, frozen. And it wasn't just because of Elena's filings. It was because she'd roped in two other Class E shareholders with minority blockers. Quiet women, finance ops, never invited to golf weekends. Together, they now held 4.6%. Just enough. Brandon hit dial. Patrick, he said, voice like gravel. Tell me there's a way out. The CFO's silence on the other end said more than a paragraph ever could. She's playing clean, Patrick finally murmured. This is surgical. A pause. Then, did you sign the termination file? I did, Brandon muttered. Digitally, auto-approved. I thought. You thought wrong. By noon, investors were asking questions. By 1, the contract freeze notifications hit the merger partner's inbox. And at 1:43 p.m., a junior associate from legal arrived at Brandon's office with a trembling hand and a simple statement. Elena's team just filed a revision request. She's asking for reinstatement or arbitration. He laughed too loud. Reinstatement? After this circus? But inside, his stomach twisted. Because if arbitration happened, everything would become public record, including the texts, the votes, the internal notes he thought he deleted. And he knew Elena had them. The only thing worse than a woman with power was a woman with proof. Friday came dressed in storm clouds. Not outside, the sky was mockingly clear. But inside the building, every hallway felt colder. HR moved like ghosts. Legal locked doors. The executive floor, usually buzzing with polished shoes and forced laughter, had gone eerily quiet. Something was unraveling, and the thread had a name: Elena Morales. Brandon stood in front of the mirror in the executive bathroom, straightening his tie for the third time. His reflection didn't reassure him. His reflection looked like a man trapped in a structure he thought he'd designed. On his phone screen blinked a subject line he couldn't ignore. Form 12B, arbitration notice filed, voting motion under dispute. He turned it face down. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Elena sat calmly in conference room 4C, the one with no windows but perfect acoustics. Across from her, 2 external attorneys, one from the merger partners' side, the other neutral counsel from the arbitration board. Both wore polite smiles. Neither underestimated her. "Before we begin," she said, placing a black leather folder on the table, "I'd like to note that sections 8.2 and 8.4 of the original equity plan were modified without unanimous Class E consent. That makes the vote invalid by structure." "On what grounds?" the merger counsel asked too quickly. She opened the folder. Inside, timestamps, document version logs, and the crown jewel, an internal Slack message from Brandon, joking. "She's gone. Let's push it through before anyone smart reads the fine print." The attorneys went still. "You realize," said the neutral counsel slowly, "this isn't just a violation. It's a trigger." She nodded. "That's why I've submitted a request for binding equity audit and a temporary injunction on Brandon's authority until board review." Upstairs, Brandon's phone buzzed again, another subject line. "Notice of internal review. CEO governance challenge." His heart dropped, because Elena hadn't come for revenge. She came for clarity, and the system had finally started listening. He looked around his office, the framed deal memos, the plaques, the fake laughter baked into the walls. And for the first time, it all felt temporary, like a stage that had been struck, waiting for the next act. The funny part? He still hadn't read the last page of her folder, and that was about to cost him everything. The Monday board meeting started at 9 o'clock sharp. By 9:06, Brandon realized no one was on his side. The boardroom, once his theater of dominance, felt different now, colder, watchful. The chairs were filled, yes, but the nods were slower, the smiles tighter. The merger blocker had spooked them, not just the missed clauses or frozen shares, but the ease with which Elena had executed everything. The chairman, an old Wall Street tactician named Dellinger, cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the injunction materials," he said flatly. "And we've also read your internal communications, Brandon. The committee agrees the filings are procedurally sound." Brandon opened his mouth, but the chairman raised a hand. "Before you speak, the rest of us voted this morning, unanimously." Brandon blinked. "On what?" Dellinger looked him square in the eye. "On your temporary suspension from merger-related activity, pending audit." Gasps would have been too theatrical. Instead, there was silence. Brutal, pressurized silence. Brandon tried to speak again, to explain, to redirect. But no one met his eyes. Not the CFO, not legal, not even his hand-picked director of strategy, who now studied his nails with laser focus. Elena wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. Her filings spoke louder than any voice. Her folder had been passed around like gospel. The room already knew her version of the story. And more importantly, they believed it. 10 floors below, Elena sat by the window of the Atrium Cafe, sipping black tea with lemon. She wasn't hiding, just choosing where to stand. She had declined an invitation to this meeting, politely, powerfully, because when you know the tide has turned, you don't need to push. Her phone buzzed. Incoming email. Subject: Governance Review. Shareholder Provisions Update Draft. From Chair, Board of Directors. She smiled, but not with glee, with precision, with patience. They were already rewriting the rules, and this time she'd be the one holding the pen. By Wednesday, the building was humming with speculation. Not loud. No one dared say Elena's name above a whisper. But the energy had shifted. Assistants paused when she passed. Managers adjusted their posture. The interns? They stared like she'd walked out of a courtroom drama and into their Slack channel. Brandon, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Word had spread that he was on leave. Unofficially. No calendar entries, no Zoom logins, no memo, just absence. Like the system had silently deleted a line of code and waited to see who noticed. Elena did. She noticed everything. At 11:42 a.m., her inbox pinged with a soft chime. A file, encrypted, from legal. Subject, internal report, termination procedure, irregularities attachment, HR_COMMS_BACKLOG_02_rev. She read it twice, then once more, slower. Inside were records of Brandon's efforts to fast-track her termination. Backdated memos, misused templates, and a quietly buried email from HR flagging the action as potentially non-compliant. The smoking gun wasn't just that he tried to fire her illegally. It was that someone warned him, and he did it anyway. That was intent. She forwarded the packet to the board's internal compliance lead. Not with commentary, not with drama. Just the subject line. RE, HR chain, flag for governance action. 10 minutes later, her phone rang. Elena, the chair said, tone clipped. We've seen it. We'll convene. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Then closed her laptop. She didn't smile. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about truth, order, balance, and maybe, just maybe, showing every woman in that building that silence isn't the only option. Outside her glass door, a junior executive knocked hesitantly. Miss Morales, there's a call for you from the Merger Partners Council. She stood, calm, centered, because she already knew what they were going to ask next. The voice on the line was velvet smooth and heavy with hesitation. Elena, said the Merger Council, we'd appreciate your insights on how to move forward. Off the record, of course. She let the silence breathe, measured, controlled. Off the record, she said, means nothing if you're not prepared to act on the record. There was a pause, the kind people make when their script doesn't work, then a reluctant laugh. Fair, the voice admitted, but we're in a bind. We were not made aware of your stake, nor of the structural vulnerabilities in the termination process. You should have done due diligence, she replied simply. You didn't, that's not my problem. But it is your merger, the voice pressed. At least partially. You're blocking it, and if we can't close within quarter, there are penalties on both sides. Elena looked out the window, the city reflecting back like a chessboard. She wasn't here to burn deals. She was here to redefine them. I'm not blocking the merger, she said. I'm blocking this version of it. A shuffle on the other end. So, what do you want? Finally, the question that mattered. I want reinstatement of all unlawfully terminated employees tied to the equity pool, she said calmly. I want a board seat for Class E representation, and I want the internal governance clause revised to prevent unilateral contract actions on equity holders. Silence. You're serious? She didn't even blink. You want the votes? Those are my terms. The voice sighed. We'll take it back to the partner board. And I'll wait, she said, but not indefinitely. If this goes to arbitration, everything becomes public, including the pressure to erase minority shareholders. Another pause, this time heavier. Message received. She ended the call. Not angrily, not dramatically, just with the confidence of someone who had learned one brutal truth. Control doesn't come from being liked. It comes from knowing your value and knowing their weaknesses. She reached for her cup of coffee. Still hot. In the background, the legal department had started updating the governance docs in real time. The first official offer came in at 7:12 a.m. the next morning. Subject: Revised merger terms, Class E addendum, from merger partner. Legal affairs, CC, board, compliance, internal counsel attachment, draft_gov reform _Elena Morales .pdf. It was subtle, no fanfare, no apology, just legal language wrapped in carefully measured respect. But Elena knew the difference. They had stopped ignoring her. They had stopped controlling the narrative. Now, they were asking for her pen. She read the document thoroughly, every clause, every footnote, every comma. And there it was, her demands folded into the text. Class E board observer role, equity termination safeguards, voting freeze protocol clarification, everything she had outlined, in writing on record. Her phone buzzed. Text from Patrick, CFO. I read the draft. You did it. He really underestimated you. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened a blank email and typed, to internal board, legal, merger partner subject, draft addendum feedback attachment, Elena _suggested edits _v 2.pdf. Her edits weren't dramatic. She didn't ask for more shares. No demand for title or spotlight. What she did request: whistleblower protection for internal analysts, anonymized audit triggers on future deals, and a quarterly transparency report to all classes of shareholders. Systems matter more than seats. Legacy outlasts noise. Downstairs, HR was quietly updating her status in the system. Reinstated, advisory capacity, no press release, no champagne. Just a single new badge delivered to her desk with the same minimalist lettering. E. Morales, Strategic Governance Council. No more senior analyst, no more invisibility. And still, she didn't walk into Brandon's old office. Now dark, untouched. She didn't need to. Her office had no glass walls, but it had reach, influence, and memory. Outside her door, someone knocked. A younger woman, early 30s, nervous hands and wide eyes, held a folder to her chest. Miss Morales, I'm sorry. I know you're busy, but I think I found something odd in the new shareholder option scheme. Can I show you? Elena smiled, not with triumph, but with purpose. Come in, she said. Let's read it together. The document was 27 pages long. Not unusual. What was unusual were the changes buried in it. Phrasing that bent rules just enough to be legal, but sly enough to go unnoticed. The kind of legal gymnastics designed to dilute power without triggering alerts. Elena flipped pages in silence, the younger woman watching her anxiously. This language in section 14.2, the junior analyst pointed out, voice trembling. It lets them reclaim unvested options during a merger without cause, under a market adjustment clause. Elena looked up. That clause didn't exist before. The woman nodded. They added it last week, quietly, no announcement. The version uploaded to the portal doesn't match the one sent to Class E holders. Elena sat back in her chair. This wasn't just carelessness. It was a repeating pattern. Slip changes into dense documents, trust that no one reads them. But now, people were reading, because she taught them to. Send me the original and the altered version, Elena said. I'll escalate. The analyst hesitated. They're going to hate me for this, aren't they? Elena's voice was calm. Good. That means you're doing something right. 15 minutes later, Elena was in a call with legal and the chair. This isn't a mistake, she said plainly. This is engineered obfuscation. If the merger went through today, this clause would nullify half the protections we negotiated. We'll freeze the document, the chair confirmed after a beat. Launch a line-by-line review, privately for now. But Elena had already drafted the notice, not aggressive, just factual. She didn't need fire. She had precision. Subject: amendment discrepancy in option scheme. Immediate attention required. By 3 p.m., the document was pulled from circulation. By 5 p.m., compliance had opened a new internal case, and by 6:30 p.m., a quiet HR message arrived in her inbox. Another Class E employee just requested a meeting, said you gave them the courage to speak. She stared at that line longer than she expected to, because that was the real win, not the title, not the power, but the knowledge that somewhere along the line, her silence turned into someone else's voice. The building had changed, and she wasn't done yet. The final board meeting was quiet. No posturing, no smug interruptions, no Brandon. Just the measured sound of papers turning and legal pads being filled with real notes, not doodles or distractions. The air held a strange calm, like the office had exhaled after months of holding its breath. Elena sat at the far end of the table, not at the head, but the room naturally leaned in her direction. The chairman opened the session with a glance at her, not out of courtesy, but out of recognition. We've completed the audit, he said. Findings confirmed multiple irregularities in the equity revision process. The vote was compromised. Murmurs, but no surprise. He continued. We've implemented all recommended protections from Ms. Morales' advisory packet. As of this morning, those changes are live. Elena kept her gaze steady. The chairman paused. Also, we're inviting her to remain in a permanent capacity. Senior counsel, shareholder governance. No applause, just nods, respectful, earned. She stood, not to make a speech, but to close a loop. There's still work to do, she said plainly. Systems don't fail because of villains. They fail because no one notices the cracks. I'm here to notice. It landed, deep. After the meeting, people stayed, not to gossip, but to talk, real talk, about fixing what needed to be fixed, from outdated onboarding to the way quiet voices were skipped in meetings. In the hallway, Patrick, the CFO, caught up with her. You know, he said, I thought he buried you. Elena tilted her head. He tried. Patrick gave a soft, almost sad smile. And now? Now, she replied, stepping into the elevator. We write better contracts. As the doors closed, the building around her buzzed, but it was a different sound. Not fear, not confusion, momentum. She had rebuilt not just her place, but the floor beneath everyone else's feet. And somewhere, on a backup server no one thought to check, her name had been added to the authorship metadata of the new shareholder charter. Co-architect E. Morales. A quiet legacy etched in structure, unshakable.